Shalom. Tamar had anticipated this day for the past 3 years. After graduating college, Tamar had treated herself to a one-week trip to Israel to explore her roots. She had grown up in a traditional home where love of Judaism and Israel were constants, but not the priority. Tamar knew there was more to her heritage, and before joining the quote-unquote real world, she wanted to explore what her ancestors' traditions had to offer her. Tamar's week in Israel extended to a month, and as she quickly depleted her savings to see more historical sites, take more classes, and enjoy more intimate discussions, Tamar felt herself grow as a person and felt more connected to her heritage. Eventually, Tamar returned to America and joined the workforce. Every week, Tamar set aside a small portion of her paycheck to save up for a return trip to Israel. Now, 3 years later, she was finally standing back at the Kotel, her well-worn Siddur and Chumash in hand. Tamar began studying this week's Sedra. It was different than the usual stories or laws that most Sedra presented. This one was in the form of a poem. One verse struck her. After discussing what will happen if the Jewish people stray off the proper path, Hashem said, "I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end will be, for they are a generation of change. They are not recognizable as my children for whom I have reared." God then explains what would bring the Jewish people to such a low state. "They have provoked my jealousy with a non-God, provoked my anger with their vanities. Thus, I will provoke their jealousy with a non-people, provoke their anger with a foolish nation." It took Tamar a few moments to realize what it was about these verses that struck such a chord within her. 3 years earlier, Tamar attended a lecture entitled An Introduction to Kohelet. The lecture gave an overview of the various themes presented throughout King Solomon's book, Kohelet. Tamar recalled the lecture quoting King Solomon's statement, "Vanities of vanities, vanity of vanities, all is vanity." Tamar perceived a connection between the verse in our Sedra and that in Kohelet. God declared that he will hide his face from the Jewish people because they provoked his anger and with their vanities. Tamar saw a symmetry in God's reaction to the Jewish people's chase of vanity. God wasn't going to punish them with plague, famine, or war. Rather, he was simply going to ignore them. This is perfectly commensurate with the Jewish people's sin. The Jewish people didn't commit some heinous crime. They ignored God and chased after their own vanity. In turn, just as the Jewish people ignored God, God ignores them. In the symmetry of action-reaction of God and the Jewish people, Tamar perceived true justice. God was informing the Jewish people that he would treat them exactly as they chose. If they wanted to have nothing to do with God, God would have nothing to do with them, meaning he would no longer offer providential protection. God states, and then I will see what their end will be. As our sages stated, in the path that a person chooses, God leads them. Shabbat Shalom.